The Parsha, the Torah portion for this week, is in the book of Exodus. And so I'd like to just start with people reflecting on the word Exodus itself. I mean, think about Exodus, think about it as a word and what it means. And help me out. I mean, what does the word Exodus mean to you? Any ideas? Leaving the land, okay? Anyone else? Yes. Escape. Journey. Journey, is that right here? To go out from. Okay, Exodus to go out from. And and there's a monumental quality to Exodus as well. It's a large group of people that are leaving, that are usually fleeing, escaping. And that's what's happening in the Bible. That's what's happening in the story as we go through the Torah week by week, and we look at the progress in the story, and we remember that there's something that's pushing us out. There's something that is happening that's making you fearful and making you need to escape. And we know, and as we look at the world, and we look at the world today, very much like in the ancient world, the things that are pushing you out are violence, abuse, persecution, hunger. These are the things that were compelling, and we, in our Passover story and in our prayers, we remind ourselves that we were slaves, that we were persecuted. That's who we are. That's part of our identity. But our identity is also the Exodus, that we are refugees. That's part of who we are. That partially defines our values. It defines what we do. So in this parsha, it's Exodus 25 through 27, and it's this point in which the Israelites are wandering in the desert. They are refugees. They're living in tents. And they're coming together and they're trying to figure out how to function as a community and how to find that the power that unites people as a community. And they come together, and the name of this parsha is Parsha Terumah. Terumah translates to gifts, to offerings, to contributions, to what the people can bring. And fortunately, in a moment, I'm going to be introducing Ethan, and he's going to be able to tell you a little bit of what you might be able to do in the ways of gifts and offerings to support refugees. But what God does is he tells Moses to tell the people to bring gifts, to bring offerings, to bring donations. And he says, from every person whose heart is so moved. In other words, this is something, it's not a requirement. It's something that requires your heart to be moved. It's something you're doing willingly, you're doing voluntarily, and you're moved to do that. Your heart is moved to do that. The Parsha goes on to say that, so to let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. And for me, this is what God is all about. It's us coming together, it's creating this sense that bringing all the offerings, all the gifts that we have to bring, and that's where we find the dwelling of God, when we are in that space. I look and I see what our country's been doing in the last month or two. I look at the debate that's happening in the Senate and in the House about immigration, about refugees at our border. And I don't see that generosity. I don't see the bringing of offerings, the bringing of gifts, how we can contribute. What I see is a closing out. And specifically, what the Senate was negotiating with the White House was raising the standard from what most of you are, even with hardly any background in refugees, you know the term, the well-founded fear of persecution. Most people do. That goes back to, the end of World War II. And that's been the standard for determining who is a refugee. And the Senate basically agreed to raise that standard to more likely than not, to have to, as a screening standard, even to get a hearing. And then on top of that, the Republicans and the Democrats agreed in the Senate, and the president agreed, that they would put a limit. If, on average, over the course of a week, if more than 5,000 people crossed the border, they would close the border and not even consider a claim of a person to say, I have a well-founded fear of being persecuted, or even a more likely than not chance. To basically say the border's closed to you, we're going to push you back, we're not even going to give you a chance. Think about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, the Refugee Convention, 1951. Those years are important. They came right on the heels of the Holocaust, right on the heels of World War II. It was a declaration by the world to stop the atrocities, to stop the persecution. But if you couldn't stop the persecution and stop the atrocities, at least you were going to welcome people and you were going to help people if they were fleeing persecution. And now we're saying, if there's more than 5,000, if you're number 5,001, sorry. If it's an exodus, which is certainly more than 5,000 people, forget it. No more exodus. We just had a wonderful dinner. And I want to thank Parwana in the back for cooking a beautiful, beautiful meal. And I want to introduce you to Amiri and Parwana. I want to tell you a little bit about their story. Amiri worked as an interpreter for US Special Forces in Afghanistan. He was in forward operating bases. He was all over the country. He shared the real dangers along with the American GIs that he called his brothers. But beyond that, he bore particular dangers because he was an Afghan. That his hope for democracy for his country and rights for women and for minorities in his country put his life in danger. And he, with his family, tried to flee multiple times. They were threatened, their lives were threatened, and they tried to leave the country. They were pushed back. They got even as far as Turkey, and they were put on a plane, and they were sent back into the hands of the Taliban, the modern-day pharaoh that enslaves women and persecutes them, and enslaves minorities and persecutes them. But finally, in the chaos of the August 21st collapse of the Afghan government supported by the West and of the US support for that, in that evacuation, along with 70,000 other people, yes, let's use the word, exodus. They were part of a mass exodus of people that fled the country. They got on a plane, and then they had their time in the desert as well, the modern desert. They spent 5 months at a US military base. They spent 3 months in a little hotel room, which we visited them in Silver Spring. But finally, thankfully, we discovered them, and we brought our gifts, we brought our offerings. We opened our hearts to them, and we welcomed them, and we created a dwelling where we really felt the presence of God. And as I look out and I see the faces of people that were part of that, I really feel that divine presence. And when I look at the Amiris and I see how they've opened their hearts to us and what they've given back to us many times over, I feel that divine presence as well. So I think we need to realize, as lucky as we are to meet the Amiris and to know them as people, there are millions and millions of refugees around the world that we're never going to meet. There are people that are wandering in the desert, in all kinds of deserts now. And there are people that are at great, great risk in Gaza and many other places of having their exoduses pushed and stopped and prevented them from leaving and making them face atrocities that put their very lives in danger. We need to stop those atrocities from happening, but when they happen, we need to open our hearts. And that's what we're asking you to do tonight, is to open your hearts and to give your offerings and to give your gifts. And with that, I want to introduce Ethan to tell you about his Bar Mitzvah project. Shabbat Shalom.